Hello everyone, welcome back to Jessie Kate Creates. In today's video, I am going to be making I think a fall themed card. I have a loose idea in my head. I'm not sure exactly what I'm making, but we're gonna give it a go and see how it turns out. And I figured I'd bring you along with me while I make this card. So let's jump into it. Okay, so to begin with, I have a piece of cardstock. This is 80-pound cardstock that measures 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So it's just a full A2 size panel. And I'm going to be doing ink blending onto this. I'm hoping that I'm going to turn this into like a leaf looking type thing. I don't know. But right now I just need to cover this in some ink. So I've pulled a couple different colors. I have Concord and Ninth's Eggplant, Buttercup, Cranberry, and Parsley, and I'm just gonna kind of blend them on in random splotches and we'll see what happens. So let's get to it. For these cards, I didn't know exactly what I was going to be doing, but I knew I wanted them to have an autumnal feel to them. So I tried to pull colors that I thought you might see on the changing leaves outside, which is how I came up with this color palette. I really wanted to have the fall vibes. You'll see I also add in spiced marmalade from Distress Inks to kind of round out my color selection here. Now, a couple things you might notice while I'm doing this ink blending. The first is that I am not trying to get a smooth blend. I'm really more just focused with getting color down on the paper. So while at this point I didn't know what I was going to be doing to these backgrounds, I was thinking about using a stencil with them. I wasn't really sure how, but a lot of times when I use a stencil, it's only a little bit of it that peeks through, so it doesn't need to have a perfect blend. It really just needs to have the color on there. The other thing you might notice is that I'm not worried about creating mud on this background. Brown is one of those gorgeous colors that we see in the fall, so I really wanted some of that on my card. So I'm totally fine with letting the green blend into the red and the purple blend into the orange. I really like how these backgrounds turned out. Now I made 2 backgrounds this way, and then I kind of got lazy and I didn't want to keep ink blending. So I decided to try making some backgrounds using ink swiping, and that's what you see me doing here. So I'm just using the exact same inks I used before, and I'm swiping them over the card. I'm trying not to press too hard and just make sure that I cover up the entire card with all of these colors. You will notice in a minute I get a little heavy-handed with the red and I try to go back in and add more colors to kind of tone it down a little bit. I didn't know if this would work out. I didn't know if I would like it, but at the end of the day, this is just paper. So even if I didn't like it, I could just figure out a different way to use it and grab a new sheet of paper to make backgrounds that I did like. Luckily, I ended up really liking the way both of the ink swiped backgrounds turned out. So I had a total of 4 backgrounds. And once they're all done, I decide to add some ink splatter to them. I love good splattering on a card. So I grabbed some gold metallic acrylic paint and I mixed it with some clean clear water on an ink block. And then I just take a paintbrush and flick it onto my blended panels. I just have an old shoebox that I use for this. And you can use as much splatter or as little splatter as you like. I really like it, so I tend to use a lot. You don't have to. If you don't like splatter, you can totally skip this step. The beauty of crafting is that you can totally make things to fit your style. So once I've put ink splatter on all of the backgrounds, this is how they come out looking. I think they're gorgeous. That first panel is probably my favorite one, but I think they all look great. So now I'm moving on to stenciling, and I have 2 different stencils here. The first one that I'm going to use is from A Colorful Life Designs, and it's their mid-century geometric stencil. I love this stencil, it's so cute. And for my medium, I am using Heavy Gel. And I'm just using this as a stencil paste. I've never used it before, and I think usually it's more associated with fine arts, but I've seen other paper crafters use this in a similar manner, so I figured I'd go ahead and give it a try and see how I like it. If you don't have stencil paste or a heavy gel, that's totally fine. You could make cards similar to this by using clear heat embossing. When this gel dries, I know it's white now, but it is going to dry clear. So you could totally use, if you took like a sticky ink pad, like Versamark ink, and just squished that through your stencil and used clear embossing powder, it would totally give you the same look. One thing to note about using a gel like this or a stencil paste, I'm using water reactive inks, so the paste is picking up some of that color, so I'm making sure not to put any of the used paste back into the jar. And you'll notice that on the side of my paper here in a bit. When I wipe off my palette knife, you'll see it's very yellow and orange because it is picking up some of that color. Okay, so something I want to talk about while I keep applying gel to the rest of these panels. Have you guys ever been in a crafty mood where you're just frustrated? Maybe your card or your project isn't turning out how you want it to, and you know the best thing for you to do is just to step away. That's how I was when I was finishing these cards. So once all of the panels had completely dried and I was trying to turn them into cards, I was just running into problem after problem. Really quick, back to the card. Now I have the Gina K thick brush stencil, and I'm just using it on these backgrounds in the exact same manner. So my husband and I, when I was making these cards, we were getting ready for a week-long trip to Washington, D.C. We just live a couple hours away. And I don't know why, but I really had it in my head that I wanted these cards to be finished before we left for our vacation. I don't know why. I wasn't giving these to someone and it was time sensitive. I wasn't making these for a client. So there really was no rush other than the rush that I was putting on myself, which was totally unnecessary. So I was trying to turn these into cards. I was trying some heat embossing and I kept messing up. I would smear the clear ink, or at one point I put my finger into the heat embossing while it was still warm and that smeared. I was trying to layer things and I kept getting it crooked. And the best thing for me to do would have been to put the project down and walk away. That really is what I should have done. But I was frustrated and I just kept telling myself, no, I need to finish these cards. Pause really quick, back to the cards. It's the next day now and the gel has dried and this is what it looks like. On its own, I think this is a really cool look, but I am going to take it a step farther. One thing I will note about this particular heavy gel, you'll notice the ink underneath it kind of lightens. So in that area, instead of being a deep red, it's kind of like a bright orange now. That wasn't the look I was going for, but in the end, it all worked out. So what I'm doing to these panels now was, at this point, I decided to try the Joseph's coat technique. I'd seen other people do this before, but I had never done it myself. So I thought this would be a fun chance to give it a try, and I love the way it looked. I thought it would cover up some of the ink splattering, but it completely shone through, and I love how this turned out. It's so pretty. You will see in a minute here, once I get the brown ink all over the card, I am just going to take a paper towel and wipe off all of the wet ink that's sitting on top of our dried gel. And I don't think I mentioned it, but this is just early espresso ink from Stampin'. So back to the story. When we got home from our vacation in DC, I looked at the cards I made, and you guys, I wasn't happy with them. I could see the errors that I had made. They didn't look how I wanted them to, so I very carefully took them apart and remade them. And so for the rest of this video, instead of being a process video, it's going to be a project share. And I think that just goes to show you that cards are made best when they're made from a place of joy and not a place of frustration. Because when I remade the cards, I liked them so much more. So sorry I don't have the process to show you, but I hope you will enjoy seeing how I finished all of the cards. Now here are all of the final backgrounds. I love the way these turned out. They were not what I had in mind when I started this project, but I really, really like the result that I got. I think they're absolutely gorgeous. I love the shine from the gel and from the gold splatter. I love the richness of the brown in the background with the vibrancy of all of the colors that are trapped underneath. I'm so happy with how these turned out. So now let me show you all of the completed cards I made, and we'll talk a little bit about the products that I used. So for the cards, I tried to keep it a little bit on the simple side, but I do love how these cards came out when I finished them after I got back from my trip. Luckily, remaking, pulling off bits and re-adding things didn't damage the background, so I got really lucky there. And I love how these turned out. So I tried to keep it, like I said, on the simple side. So for this card, I decided to make a wedding card, and I used some Spanish sentiments that I've had in my stash for a while, but I've never used before. So I pulled out this stamp set from Fun Stamper's Journey called Felices para Siempre. I used these for the front and inside of my card. So I took this stamp that says Y vivieron felices para siempre. So sorry if my Spanish is bad, you guys, but it kind of basically says, and they lived happily ever after. I heat embossed that with some gold embossing powder onto some cream cardstock. And I just went in my stash and found some rectangle dies that fit the size of my sentiment, and I cut it out. And then I went up to the next size die just to cut a mat for it as well with some gold cardstock. I did pop my sentiment up just to add a little bit of dimension to that sentiment. For the panel itself, I just cut it down. I wanted to have a wide border on my card base so that it would kind of feel like almost like a piece of art, I feel like, when things have a wide border. So I cut the panel down to 3 5/8 by 4 7/8. And then I cut the gold mat that I used as the back for 3 3/4 by 5. That just gives me a really thin border that I think looks very kind of classy and elegant on a card. I did go ahead and take a piece of ribbon and wrap it around that background. And that's mainly because when I got into card making, I saw a lot of people using ribbon, so I bought a lot of ribbon and then later on realized I don't tend to use it that often in my card making, so I'm trying to use it more now. This ribbon in particular is from the Dollar Tree. I purchased it, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. It's just brown with some gold flecks that match the card really well, but you could use whatever is in your stash. So that completed the front of this card. Oh, I should say, I matted this background panel. I popped it up on some foam tape. So this card has about 2 layers of foam on it, but I think it works really well. And then I just took this stamp to finish off the inside of the card. So that's card 1. Moving on to card 2. I finished this card the exact same way, but this time I decided to make a sympathy card. So for this one, I used the scrapbook.com In Our Hearts Forever stamp set. I think this is a really great one for sympathy cards, and I love this sentiment. The moment we treasure with those we love will remain in our hearts forever. I think it's lovely. So I just had to use a larger die that fit this sentiment, but otherwise, these 2 cards I finished the exact same way using the exact same measurements. I did use some lighter gems. On this one I used some champagne ones. On this one I used some deeper gold ones. But I think it worked out really well. For both sets, the gems I used were from the Spellbinders Colored Gems Essentials, and I just used the gold mix. Of course, you can use whatever you have on hand. And I did add a sentiment to this card as well. I just put thinking of you during this difficult time. And this sentiment is from one of my all-time favorite stamp sets. And it is Penned Sentiments by the Ton. If you're a beginner and you need kind of a variety of different sentiments, I think this is a really good one. And I love the font. So I just used that stamp to finish off the inside. Now for both of these cards, I did make matching envelopes. I took the thick brush stencil that I used to make the backgrounds, and for one of the cards I just stenciled on the flap of the envelope. I used the same early espresso ink that I used on the background just so that they would tie together. And for the other card, I just took the front of the envelope and kind of started to blend it on and faded it about halfway through. I liked the way both of those look. Now for the next two cards, I got a little bit fancier. So for this card, I really like how this card turned out, but when I was making these, I wasn't in love with this panel. It ended up being a lot more bright orange and yellow than I intended, and you kind of lost the greens and the purples and the browns. So I wanted to cover some of that up, and I also wanted to bring those reds and greens back into the card. And so to do that, I decided to add these leaf ephemera. These I got at the Dollar Tree a few years ago, and I liked them because they added back in those colors that kind of got lost on this card. So I popped those up onto the card, and then for the sentiment, I used the Stampin' Up! Rose Wonder stamp set. I love this little label. So I heat embossed this label in gold, and then inside of the label, I used this stamp set from Hero Arts. I just took the word grateful and I heat embossed it inside the label, and then I fussy cut it all out, and I really love the way that looks. I just popped it on top of the leaves. Now I did finish this off with some gold ribbon. Like I said, I'm trying to use up the ribbon I have in my collection, and I added some gems to the card. I thought that finished this off nicely. Since I'm not sure if this is going to be a card, you know, for Thanksgiving, a general thank you, an encouragement card, just letting a friend know how awesome they are, I decided to keep the inside of this card blank. And for my last card, dun, da, da, I think this one might be my favorite. I loved this background because it kept the yellows and the greens, the browns, a little bit of the purple. I thought it was just gorgeous. So I really wanted to make sure that you could see those on this card. Now, if this cluster looks familiar to you, you may have seen it before. So if you follow me on Instagram, last year I made cards with the Call Me Crafty Owl sheetload of cards from September 2021. And in this sketch, Alicia suggests, you know, making this shape, adding the sentiment, and putting some sort of floral piece behind it. And as you can see, that is exactly what I did for this card. I loved it so much when I did it last year that I decided to do it again for this card here. Now the sentiment here, the thinking of you, is just from a stamp set from Recollections. I don't think they name any of their stamp sets, so I don't know the name of this, but this is what it looks like. I love that font. I thought it was gorgeous. And for this card, and for this one, I don't think I said it before, for each of these, the panels are 3 7/8 by 5 1/8. And I brought in a gold mat that is 4 by 5 1/4. Again, I get that really narrow mat on my cards that I really like. And for both of these cards, I finished off matching envelopes the exact same way as I did for the others. For one, I just blended some ink on the flap. And for the other, I blended it halfway up the front of the envelope. And I did keep this one blank as well. So those are all of the cards I made. I love them all so much. I do think this one is my favorite, but I think they are all absolutely gorgeous. And I'm so happy that I took the time to revisit these cards when I was kind of in a better mindset and I could finish them off the way I wanted to. So lesson definitely learned. Create from a place of joy, not from a place of frustration. Thank you guys so much for tagging along with me as I made these cards. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to give it a like and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you can always see my latest crafty projects. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!